Hello and welcome to the Natural Selection Podcast, the conservation podcast brought to you by the University of Exeter's Bioscience Master students. Your host for today is myself, Tristian Herbert, and in this episode, Living with the King of the Savanna, we will be exploring how conservation practitioners in Kenya can work with communities to help them protect and indeed benefit from the wildlife they live alongside. We are here today to interview Enoch Ontiri, who is doing his PhD here on some really inspiring work on conservancies in Kenya. So without further ado, welcome Enoch. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you.
And if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Enoch Ontiri, PhD student here at Exeter, Kornblut, and my research is on human-wildlife interactions, looking at the conflicts that arise as a result of humans, livestock interacting with wildlife, and particularly the big cats. And my focus is so much onto lions. If I were able to exclude them as exclusive predators, I look at all issues that influence predation behavior, from sociocultural practices, ecological aspects of the lions, and even the political aspects of the lions as a species of interest. My inclination is so much towards the people that are around protected areas. So these are the people that take care of the livestock and the wildlife. They've lived with these animals ever since the protected area idea came in and found them and excluded them from the land that they shared with the wildlife, but they didn't exclude the wildlife from the people's land.
That's really interesting, and I think that's something really important in conservation, is that human aspect as well. So in terms of lion conflict, what kind of things can be done to kind of moderate that conflict, I suppose, to help local people coexist better with lions?
I would say that a lot of work that has been done before by other researchers has been looking at the ecological aspects of the conflict and treating the people as culprits, approaching them with an assumption that they are on the wrong side of the conservation aspect. And I think this has left out important aspects that would be used to enhance conservation. And so my conclusion so far, although I've not finished doing my research, is that a systems approach would be the most effective way of bringing conservation and reducing conflict. And because the wildlife is not excluded or does not live in one area, they move large areas, and to be able to apply a systems approach, we need to look at the landscapes, and so maybe a landscapes approach to conservation of the wildlife. And a landscapes approach, of course, would include talking to the people, because people are part of the landscape, involving them in decision making, and also involving them in implementing the decisions. And also, in as much as we allocate the cost to the people, because naturally, by saying we are conserving the wildlife without supporting the people, we are allocating the costs of conservation, because when wildlife predate on livestock, the people pay the cost. So if we can find a way of equitably sharing the cost of conservation and the benefits that come from conservation, as the ecosystem benefits, both professionally and the monetary benefits that come from ecotourism, then people will start having a positive approach towards conservation. They will start participating in conservation and then minimize conflict.
Fantastic. And I guess a part of that, in terms of a monetary approach, is ecotourism.
Yes.
Which is something I believe you're involved in yourself.
Yeah, we are trying to partake of the benefits that come from ecotourism, because the way the tourism industry is structured is that more of the benefits the locals, they're not even people from that community. And so part of that money that goes into back entry fees, for example, goes to the government, and it goes all the way up, and now coming down, maybe very little we get to the people in terms of the services that they get from the government. And so if we can support the people to start enterprises that would earn income to them directly, like maybe having a community lodge, having people involved in making handicrafts and things like beekeeping, so they can sell their earning, then get income directly. So that way, then people start benefiting. And so the small steps that we are making is to try and mobilize people to form legal institutions that can then enable them to earn income from the to have a community group, have it legitimized by having it registered with the register of persons in the government. Then that way, then they can be able to have a bank account, they can be able to account for their resources, and then they can have like a governance structure that can then enable them to start attracting tourists to come in and pay directly to them, and so that way they partake of the benefits.
Brilliant. So you did your master's here, and you did the same master's that we're doing at the moment. And I was curious what your master's project was and how that led to your PhD.
I did my master's about 9 years ago here, and my research was still in the same aspect, looking at the impact of people's practices, people's economic practices or cultural practices on biodiversity. And so I had, before I came to do the master's, I had spent time in Papua New Guinea, and I developed this interest looking at how people's cultural practices affected the cassowary bird totem animal to their community, so culturally it is protected. And so the practices around this bird the sacred sites as per the community perceptions will lead to more conservation of this particular species. And the basis of this species, then we can conserve an ecosystem. So I started putting data on that. Unfortunately, when I came here, this data was good enough to enable me write master's thesis. And so that is what I did for my master's. And then when I went out, I started working on a project looking at the impact of agricultural practices and pesticides on lions. Around that time, people were using pesticides to poison lions. When lions have killed, or maybe an animal has been killed by cheetah, leopard, or hyena, people will lace this carcass with fuladan, which was like a nematicide that kills by interfering, poisoning the nervous system. And so the lions would easily die, because lions usually they are lazy animals, so they would take the earliest opportunity to get their food, and so they scavenge a lot. So if they find meat somewhere, they will just eat it. And so because they move as a pride, so many of them would die at the same time in one place. So we were funded by National Geographic to try and look at how pesticides are affecting lions in Kenya. And so that is when I started now getting involved with pig guards and started collecting data. Actually, part of the data that we collected then forms my introductory chapter of my PhD.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Do you have any advice for current master students, or just in conservation in general, for people getting into conservation and wondering which path to take?
There are many aspects of conservation that people tell you, right from conservation of species to ecosystems and community development. And I think, again, there could be a limitation of the resources available and people interested in this. So you need to get somebody to support you when you're doing the PhD, to supervise you. So your interest needs to find interest in the department, and then you look at the resources that you have, because there will be so many interesting research projects in Kenya, but you need to come to Kenya. So many aspects on pig cats, conservation, communities around protected areas, the rangelands, the issues of conservation within the rangelands, and there are many organizations on the ground that have been collecting this data, looking at using the monitoring the ecosystem, like the rangelands, monitoring the species, looking at behavior of the big cats, the lions, the cheetah. In Kenya there's a lot of data. The cheetah research projects, the lion research, they have a lot of data. And there are policy issues, so there are organizations dealing with environmental policy issues, and you can always find projects to work with them.
Great, lovely. And another question I had then is, what's your kind of underlying I suppose, motivations, because I read a lot about what's happening to nature, and I guess I read too much of the bad stuff. So are you hopeful? Are you optimistic?
I am very optimistic. I mean, I've been doing this more than 20 years now. I think maybe my entire life has been into this, because when I was growing up, we were depending on nature in so many ways, because we lived off the farm, and we still had natural wild places. We rushed into the forest. From class, we sneak out and go and collect fruits in the bush. So I think if I was not hopeful, I would not be doing this. I've seen some very big changes to biodiversity, and I've also seen some recovery and improvements in biodiversity. I think if species on Earth were to be extinct, the only species that would go extinct and never recover is the Homo sapiens, but the other species naturally would recover. I think you've heard of cases where like an animal, a species that was assumed extinct in a place has appeared after 30 years. Recently in West Africa, in Cameroon, they found the lions that were extinct, and across the region you cannot see where they walked in, because then you would have seen them, but they just find them in some relic forest. You've heard of bird species that have reappeared, reemerged after a very long time. So I think nature as a way of bouncing back, if the human influence was not so much, I think nature would still remain. If we continue the way we are going, we might finish ourselves, but the other species will survive.
I think that's very true, and I think it is really beautiful how nature can recover when we give time and reduce pressures as well. I was just curious what your plans are for the next phase of your research. And
so I'm at that stage where I'm analyzing the last bits of my data and writing up the ones that I've already finished analyzing. I had structured my PhD in terms of projects. Each chapter is like a separate project, but basically looking at how these variables affect predation by lions. I was looking at people's perceptions of lions, which I have written. I was also looking at the impact of rainfall in predation of livestock. So we went in with the assumption that when it is very wet, it is a nice weather for lions to predate livestock, but the data that we had shown us different. That yes, there's some bit of predation during the wet season, but predation intensifies when it is very dry in the communities. So I've finished doing that, and I'm starting to write up that chapter, and then we are looking at like a second level of perception of people on wildlife, on lions in particular. This is because we did perceptions like 8-10 years ago. A lot of things have happened in between. Compensation programs have come in, group ranches have evolved into conservancies, ecotourism benefits have improved, and so we want to look at people's perceptions now and see what they feel about the lions. And also now we're also looking at whether technology can be used to mitigate conflict. So I haven't finished doing that, but in the process of doing that, to roll out a software application that can be used with Android phones to report instances of predation and see whether that kind of reporting can be used to minimize conflict. So the next phase is to try and write up what I've already finished analyzing, finish up analyzing the data on perceptions. At this time, because we did about 210 focus group discussions in communities across that range, and we are analyzing that data now.
A lot of work, really important stuff. I think that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Natural Selection Podcast. Join us next time, where we will be at Kew Gardens interviewing Head of Conservation Science, Dr. Colin Clubb.